Welcome to the Long Funk Podcast. This is going to be a numbered Long Funk. Most of the time I release bonus shows these days because they're just easier to put in the feed without doing all the additional bits and pieces that make a real Long Funk podcast or a real numbered Long Funk podcast. And I do appreciate most of my listeners are actually subscribers. So they stay subscribed to the RSS feed so they can get the latest podcasts, be they bonuses or regular podcasts. Two competing ideas in this recording. The first is with regards to embracing open source so many years after my initial project, which has gone under a few different names. It's now known as the Ape SDK. And the second one associated with alternative cultures. I'm going to do the second one first and the first one second. Alternative cultures were very important to me when I was growing up. This notion that one could take the culture that existed and not even adopt it as one's own, adopt a different culture. And if you go to justplainchaos.com, justplainchaos, all one word.com, you will see some open source fictional writing and some open source games that I have developed or game for the open source fictional writing. And what that was based on was, at the time, a friend of mine at the time at least, and I ventured to a particular training camp, had a particular set of experiences, but really the fellow we went to see was the one who ended up being the important person in the story. So the writing, justplainchaos.com, the fiction, is of my interaction with that person, a little bit of an epitaph at the end associated with my final interactions with that person. And ironically, this person still exists. They're still alive and cognizant and may even be listening to this podcast. But what's fascinating through this period is the only way I can communicate with him is every 6 years I can get an email out to his brother and his brother responds. His brother's told me now to try to reach out to the fellow on Facebook, which was difficult because literally 6 years ago I attempted to do that and he still hasn't added me as a Facebook friend. But this whole notion of having an independent culture or a culture that was distinct from the existing culture of the place was pretty central to me, and I'm wondering where I really got that idea from. Certainly on my father's side of the family are somewhat Orthodox Jews, but not in any, not my grandfather or my father or my second cousins or any people like that. One of the second cousins did have a little prayer box on his door and things like that. So maybe at the very distant parts of the family, some degree of Orthodox Jewry, but it does interest me that the Hasidic Jews in particular have very distinct cultures. I actually dated a Jewish girl for a period of time, well, whatever one would say, an Orthodox Jewish girl. So I have had some indications or interactions, at least, with Orthodox Jewry. So what does that mean about justplainchaos.com? Just Plain Chaos is really the last iteration of this thing because my friend was completely eliminated from the text and it was just me and this other fellow in the text together. And it exists as a thing where I'm wondering, should it be a book? Should it be a physical thing that you can actually read and paper as opposed to something that you download and scroll through? But they're both very short. In fact, if you remember me talking about the works that I was working on, this was one of their works, which was in the 25,000 word limit. Feels like 2,500 sometimes, but really is 25,000. So that's what that represents, an ability to be separate, a separate entity, separate culture, separate things like that. But here's where it falls apart, and this is also what falls apart with regards to my open source work. You are then the only person that does this thing. It's not a culture if you're the only one that does it. And with open source more so in particular, this is something I find really quite strange, that really I'm just now a developer of one. I was thinking about this recently because through the winter Northern Hemisphere months, I'm struck with needing more sleep than I usually need, which is something that's very nice anyway when I deal with things that I have to deal with in my day-to-day, just getting a little bit extra sleep. And I was pondering that with regards to the open source development because I've moved from simulating London as the initial thing to simulating one of 3 towns around the London area. Canterbury, Maidstone, and I think Ashford were the 3 that I decided to end up simulating. And I've gone back actually to look back at Bob Mottram's code because doing it manually is just the wrong way to do it. Doing this thing manually would mean that I'd have to do London manually at some stage, which is just nuts. It's better the algorithm is adapted to a point where it can just parse over the area and produce decent maps, which unfortunately doesn't quite do that currently. So I'm looking at Bob Mottram's code and thinking to myself, I've got to rewrite some of it, or maybe tune certain aspects of the code. That seems to be the main part, that the tuning of it might actually produce the results that Bob Mottram was hoping to see. But that will take time, that will take energy, that will take time that really currently I'm not willing to spend. I'm kind of spending more of time just making sure that I get the right number of hours of sleep in order to deal with the day-to-day, which is what I'm doing currently. But I'm thinking very much associated with what is this paradigm of open source? Well, this paradigm of open source is only really answerable to me. Very similar to justplainchaos.com. Texts I wrote, people might download them, they might not download them, it doesn't really matter, but does it interact with the consciousness of people around me? Perhaps, perhaps not. I don't know. This is looking like a very short funk. It's a long funk format, but I am going to put this out as a numbered version, so you, as someone who listens in, can download it if you don't download the bonus stuff or you're not on the RSS feed. I would remind or recommend, more importantly, to my listeners, please subscribe to this podcast so you can get the bonus content as well, because otherwise episodes might come few and far between in the regular episode format. So 2 ideas here. What good is a culture if you're the only one observing it, which fits in very neatly into the open source discussion. But London software to be tuned in the near future, maybe when I get into probably the tail end of winter when my sleep is something that is less important than it is currently. Tom Barbalet in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out.